I'm Kelvin Thompson,
And I'm Chuck Jubin.
and the two of us have been talking about quality, particularly about, but not limited to, related to online and digital education for 20 plus years now. And we decided to just record some of these conversations to spread the love, and maybe it would help us narrow the conversation in search of a finish line. How's that?
As to date, Calvin, it's been an abject failure in terms of narrowing the line. But it has been most enjoyable. And yes, we've been talking about this for 20 plus years, and now 3 sessions, recorded sessions, and we'll see where it goes. But before we started recording, I was saying to you, and I'll say again, this has really kindled my thinking about the whole notion of quality, and I've rediscovered how much I enjoy thinking. And I always remember John Adams saying he took half hour every day to think, and I just really, I think we've made some progress. And as we mentioned before, we are now, I guess, up to 78 views of our second session and 1 thumbs up. So we are on the verge of going viral.
We might not be viral, but perhaps we're bacterial.
Yeah, bacterial, fungal, or some organic substance, whatever. But I will say to you this, Calvin, I did get a note, and someone challenged me for a definition of quality. So here it goes.
I can't wait. This might be the end. This might be the end of the recording session.
And maybe QED, wrap it up. The elements of quality are clarity, authenticity, unity, suspense, economy, depth, proportion, vividness, brilliance, sensitivity, emphasis, authority, flow, and precision.
But apparently not brevity.
No, quality has nothing brief about it. Yeah, nothing brief about it. Well, this is a challenge. Clearly, I'm not smart enough to think of that. So if any of our readers can tell me where I found that, we will be happy to send them an autographed copy of our new analytics book. That should turn out. That should turn off everyone.
Well, there you go.
There we go. But we have been struggling. We have been struggling with this idea of a definition of quality. We have been for 2 sessions, 20 years in 2 sessions, Calvin.
It's interesting, that string of words. I followed a handful of those, and I don't disagree with any of the ones that, I paid attention to, but they, those things strike me as like facets of a cut gemstone or something, right? I mean, it is, they're angles, they're parts. And then I think this is something we could unpack for probably another 3 sessions, but you are associated in my mind, Chuck, with this concept, this phrase of boundary object. I know it's held great fascination for you, and I've thought about it in a lot of different contexts. So we certainly could argue that quality is a boundary object, and then lately I've been thinking about all the contextualized ways that quality is constrained or not, I guess. But I don't know, just for the sake of funsies, do you want to take a stab at, for anybody who is not initiated, what the heck's a boundary object?
Indeed, I'll be happy to, Kelvin. And I think the definition I just read, I am sort of ambivalent about the fact, is that a definition? It is almost transcendent in terms of what it is. It's hard to disagree with it, but it's also very difficult to land it. When one talks about how would I put any kind of an index associated with that, and we did talk last time about the Anna Karenina principle, and do each one of those have to be met in order for something to be quality? Well, that seems to me a daunting task, a daunting task in terms of how that would play out. But as we get, I think we're edging up closer. Somehow I feel, Calvin, that we're inching, painfully closer to some conclusion about boundary. I don't know where it is yet, but I'm mildly optimistic. Boundary object. Susan Lee Starr, a marvelous sociologist, defined this concept of a boundary object. And what she said a boundary object was, it was a concept or an idea that holds a community of practice together, but is relatively weak in that community of practice. Where it becomes strong are in individual constituencies. That was the notion of a boundary object. Let me give you an example. Critical thinking. No one at the University of Central Florida disagrees with the fact that critical thinking is important. And I doubt that anyone at the University of Louisville would disagree with that. There may be some offshoots, there may be some people who disagree with it, but generally, critical thinking is highly valued. Now, when we get a large group of people, say the faculty senate together, what happens is there's almost complete disagreement on the definition of critical thinking. But it is. That is, no one really can come to consensus on what it is. However, if we go back to rhetoric, the Department of Rhetoric, they know and they agree, or physics, or particle physics, or education. It's strong in the individual constituencies, but very weak in the community. Quality maybe could be conceptualized as a boundary object. We all think quality is a wonderful thing, but you and I have been struggling now for 2 3/10 sessions and have not come to a conclusion on it. But that is the idea of a boundary object, something that holds a community of practice together, is really ill-defined, but strong enough to hold that community together, but well-defined in individual constituencies. And then if we get the individual constituencies together, they don't agree. They don't agree. It's a really fascinating, and there are many, many things that I think qualify as boundary objects.
Yes.
And
we've
perhaps,
talked about some of those, like blended learning, boundary object.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Lots of things, boundary object.
Right.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Thank you for the summary, and I agree, quality, right? And I think quality is even more challenging than that, right? Because blended learning is a good example, right? We won't go into a whole soliloquy about blended learning, but that idea of blended learning, wide appeal, say across institutions, there might be some interest in exploring blended learning and advancing blended learning, but we have to kind of define, quote unquote, broadly so that everybody is sort of in the same wide circle. But at an institution, at an individual institution, or maybe within an academic unit, there might be further specificity that would guide practice, in the local context. So, that I get that. That makes sense to me. Quality, that's challenging, right? Because while I totally agree that, boy, we can all agree that quality's good, we should be having quality, I don't know if we see quite the same local definition, because I think it's so darn multifaceted even at a local context. Can I give you an example? We were talking about this before we hit record, but just put it out there. I've been pondering this lately. Like, hypothetically, let's say that there was an outstanding orator, someone who's just checks all the boxes on presence and resonance and eye contact and interest and, I don't know, all the nonverbals and charisma. I don't know what all the things are, but by any speech standard would be excellent. But what if, hypothetically, this orator was just doing her or his thing completely detached and removed from the context? Like, to put it simply, like, couldn't read the room, didn't realize that the the illustrations or whatever that they were using are just falling flat, aren't reading the nonverbals of the audience. It's just a complete disconnect. On the one hand, excellent, high quality delivery. On the other hand, how could you in the world think of that as anything excellent if it completely fails in connecting with an audience?
That's a great point. A couple of points. Not to dwell on blended learning, but you and I have a long history with blended learning. And you remember at the University of Central Florida, we entered that realm and we called it mixed mode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we did. And we touted like that we invented it. Remember how we used to do that? And we invented this thing called mixed mode analysis, and we did it by happenstance, because in our original work, we discovered that many people were taking online courses from on-campus positions, locations, and we said, well, why don't we blend the two? Have a combination of face-to-face and online learning. And that's how we got there. We called it mixed mode for a long time until the Sloan Foundation wanted to call it blended learning. And we changed for a number of reasons. One, because there was funding associated with blended learning. Secondly, we convinced Frank Mindhaus from Sloan to fund small sessions about blended learning. And we were in those sessions, and we thought in a short period of time, we would rapidly develop a functional definition of blended learning. Consummate failure. We were unable to do that. We were on to, because again, the thing that you were talking about, the contextualization of it, people would contextualize it from their own perspective, and we couldn't get a unified definition. And I remember, and you remember, we have been active in many professional organizations. You and I, a lot of the same ones. And one that is dear to our heart that I won't mention, there was a nationally renowned speaker invited to do a keynote, well known, excellent speaker, doing his thing and completely missing the audience. Doing exactly what you said, doing exactly which historically was eminently successful for him all over the world. He was crashing and burning in this professional organization, never saw it, never had a clue. And that's exactly what you said. And I think you know the context where that happened. And this person is eminently successful, but in this particular context, it wasn't working. And you know the exact thing that I'm talking about, right?
So this is the challenge, right? So
Yeah,
even at a local level, right? I mean, any example, but online, digital, education, like the clueless orator, we will
I love
call
it.
them.
I love it. We need a T-shirt. I am the clueless orator.
And okay, I can't resist this. As we started talking about this, the picture that came to my mind was Disney's Hall of Presidents. And imagine one of those presidents doing their thing in the recorded speech, and it's a moment from history. But imagine like they're taking the thing out for repair, and it's just doing its thing out of
And
like an automaton,
and he sells 5 million Vegematics.
Yeah, that's right. But I think, like with online and digital, it's multifaceted, but then the context, right? I don't think it's even in an immediate context, like in an academic unit or an institution,
Right.
it's difficult to pin down precise definitions, right? Like, in what ways is this quality? In what ways isn't it? We have course design standards, online course design standards. Check, 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 check. I've sometimes said standards point the way to, but are not themselves quality. Okay, so yep, those are checked, but does that sum it up? No. Okay, what about the teaching presence, even in an online technology mediated way? All right, okay, well, let's say that that's good. Well, what about student learning? Well, what's learning? There's a boundary object. What about
Right.
student success? How do you operationally define that? Well, even if we're talking about like, you've said for years operationally, like final course grade of A, B, or C, success, not that, not success. Fine, let's go with that. Um, Retention, persistence, time to graduation, getting a job, those kinds of results, some would look at that as, crass, but if it if what you do doesn't result in some kind of positive benefit for the people it's designed to help, what good is it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Um, which makes me wonder and think about um, how deep do you have to go before you destroy the concept of quality? Um, um, I think it has a relatively I mean, your idea of contextualization. Um, some of the things we do are good. Some of the things we do are not good. We are now entering a new phase of trying to incorporate the student voice into quality education and higher education at UCF. And um, one of the things that the faculty senate is now proposing is bifurcating the form into two components. That is the instructor component and the course component,
Mm-hmm.
uh, under the assumption that you can independently assess the instructor from the course. Well, I don't think that's true. And I'm going to propose that to the principal. But if you build a contingency table based on that, you can, if you think about it, can have instructor good, instructor not good, course good, course not good. So you have the possible intersection of great instructor, terrible course. You have the possibility of, wonderful course, terrible instructor. How how does that work? How can you disaggregate the instructor from the course? I worked with the University of South Australia on this I just don't really see how you can do it. And I'm going to propose to the provost momentarily a study where you need to look at this, and I guarantee you, Mike, they're going to be perfectly positively correlated. I know it deep in my heart. But we're back to your notion of contextualization. Is quality really dependent on the context, Kelvin? That's really interesting. I know you said you were talking to Tom Tobin about that,
Yeah,
and I
I
don't
was
know
thinking
Tom.
about that. I was
Yeah,
thinking about that,
and I don't know Tom, but boy, that's a great mustache.
it is. I'm follically challenged myself, but I mean, you've got the impressive facial hair. He's got the
Sure.
impressive facial hair. Yeah, on TOPcast, the Teaching Online podcast,
Hmm.
Tom Kavanaugh and I had Tom Tobin on, and not too long ago. And I mean, I like Tom Tobin, and he's a really bright
Yeah.
guy, and I think we agree on far more than we disagree. But, I called it slightly spicy because my impression was that he was asserting that good teaching is good teaching regardless of the context, regardless of like the course modality, maybe even regardless of the institutional context. Like, a really good instructor is a really good instructor. Instructor does their thing. And what I said was, well, if the instructor's doing their thing, but in an online course, and then requires students to come to a required in-person experience, violating the schedule flexible access affordances of online, then how in the world can we call that a good online set of teaching behaviors? Tom would say, well, those aren't teaching behaviors. That's scheduling or marketing or whatever. And to me, I can't divorce the two because they fall within the purview of the instructor. The instructor's authority to say, student Chuck, you need to come here. I'm registered for an online class. I don't care. Come here next Thursday. I can't call that a good online course or a good online instructor. Tobin would say separate things, right? And so it's the contextualization thing.
Yeah, I can think of many instructional concepts where my preferred teaching mode would be consummately unsuccessful. I can know situations, and I know situations where I can't function as an instructor. When we were working on the quality enhancement program here with Martha, I went in to teach freshmen. I'm terrible at that. I do not know how to relate to freshman students. And a part of it is relational in terms of doing it. I can relate to graduate students. And worse yet, when I went into Judy, my wife's class, to work with kindergarten, unsuccessful is not enough to say about how I function. And it was, it was the context. It was the context. You know that. I'm back to you, Calvin. Read the room. Read the room. No, these people are not going to get in groups and discuss their feelings. These are nuclear physicists. They want information. So you give them information. That's how you teach. I mean, you got to read the room, because, to say that I am a universally successful teacher, that is arrogance beyond the belief, in my judgment. And you know that.
Which, to be clear, that is probably farther than Tom Tobin was going in his comments, right?
Yeah.
So we were just using that as a reference point
Well,
of one example.
We're using Tom's comments as a launch pad in terms of
right.
What, is context and are all these surrounding non-related parameters, scheduling, et cetera, are they part of the teaching protocol? My feeling is yes. My feeling is everything you do before and after and during the course is part of teaching protocol. I just believe that,
I might be misremembering this, but something's tickling the back of my brain. I think you told me this years ago. Something. See if this see if this feels familiar. I think. I mean, this was years ago. And I don't remember exactly the wording or the structure, but I remember it being something along the lines. You were telling me that, like, if you're doing a talk or a lesson, like there's gradations of, I don't know, I don't think you use this word, quality? I don't know. It's like you could say, okay, how well did you do the thing? Did you present well? Did you do the da 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 da? There were like these gradations, but then the final one was, but what are the people, the audience, the learners, what do they need? That's what I remember. That's the thing that rings in my ears from talking to you years ago about this thing. There's like, how well did you do your thing? You can go do your thing. But it's so funny because it's very much, I hadn't really thought about it. It's very much this illustration that we're using of like the clueless orator automaton, right? You do your thing real well, but ultimately isn't the test, what do they need? And am I responding to that need and fulfilling it or not? The proof's in the pudding, the results. You remember that?
I do remember that, and I've lived that my entire life. And this is going to be a slightly protracted story. about about me. I've found this great book, this thing, People's Eco Needs, and how they always change the conversation to be about themselves, you know?
Not enough about you. Let's
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
about
yeah.
me.
Oh, you think you got a problem? Listen, let me tell you about me. And I just listen to that. People do that all the time. But I'm going to do that now because the man who trained me at University of Wisconsin, Chet Harris, he was terrifying because Chet knew what I knew, he knew what I didn't know, and he knew what I was capable of knowing. I was completely transparent to Chet my whole life. It's terrifying. You know, it's like C.S. Lewis, but God you learn, by God you learn. And once he said a thing, and I was thinking about that. Um, I want to get to my point slightly, but you know, I know what Chet. I'm looking at his picture now because I keep it in case I think I'm getting too smart, and I look at Chet and say, "Whoa, wait a minute." But Chet would say, "Quality is like looking for your invisible uncle in a crowd." You know, but that is so right on, Kelvin, because one of my most difficult courses, and one of the things Chet said to me, you know, Chuck, when you go into your new job, the most difficult course you're going to teach is beginning statistics. And my response is, oh, Chet, no, it's mean mode median. It's going to be the easiest, a nightmare, an absolute teaching nightmare. Why? They don't want to be there. They see no use for it. They're convinced that they're never going to use this in any aspect of their life. And their last question is, what do I have to do for an A? You know, that's the context that they're coming in for. And you go through all that list, Kelvin, that you just did. The bottom line is, if I'm successful, I've convinced them to, in some degree, respect this discipline and in some degree come to the point that there may be some application for me down the road. And I have always vindicated myself when 5 years later, someone came back and said, oh, yeah, I used that, but that was way down the road. I mean, I think you're right on that. What is your ultimate fundamental primary goal in this course? Is it to go through dot, 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 or is it get your students to relate to what you're trying to do? You know, and you've done that your whole life. For God's sakes, man, you're a music teacher, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was adequate as a music teacher. I
Kelvin.
give myself a C. I'm being generous. There's a reason I'm
Oh,
not still a music teacher, probably.
oh God, Kelvin. You know, my teaching, I've always wished I had a good metaphor for everything and explain it where they could get the, oh, I see. Uh, maybe 4 out of 10, you know. You know. And then someone once pointed out to me, they wrote on their final, they said, Chuck, when you're absolutely confident in what you're teaching and what you know, you can ease down the river and you can go off into eddies and sidebars and little, whirlpools and come back on the main track. But when you're less sure, you begin covering the topic. You become covering the material. You become rigid and non-responsive. And that's right. We're absolutely right. Because if you don't really understand, you become defensive. At least, I do. I'm not sure what that has to do with quality, but somewhere in there, quality is lurking its head.
Yeah, well, maybe this is a good time to start, looking for the door and saying what we've been saying as almost like a tagline, right? That, I mean, gosh, it seems like we're never done considering quality. I mean, like we are never done and we are never done considering quality, but we do hope to get to a more practical
We do.
pausing point over time in these
We do.
conversations in order to help guide practice in
Well,
higher ed and particularly digital education. Would you agree? And what do you want to say is wrap up?
well, I do, and I think the fact that that we've gone from 11 to 78 people actually viewing this video is mildly,
Oh, is that
mildly,
quality? We're on the rise.
mildly encouraging, or
Mildly encouraging.
or people saying,
if you
people
don't
that-
want more of this, stop
I
watching.
know, or people saying to their friends, you're not going to believe this. But
It's like an accident. You got
well,
to see this.
I do have to say this though, Calvin. We did talk about the Anna Karenina phenomenon last time, and you and I fundamentally believe there must be some fundamental components, 5, 6, I don't know how many that we can identify with quality. I want to tell you that I went to Grok and Claude and Gemini and Copilot and CPT, and I asked them all to give me the Anna Karenina definition of quality, and it was monumentally disappointing. Disappointing beyond the pale, uninteresting, rigid, repeating crap that, Calvin, this is a tremendously powerful tool, but you know what I'm saying, Calvin?
I do. I mean, so I hear in there possibly a backdoor assertion that quality might possibly be inherently human, at least from the standpoint of human perception, and or transcendent in the sense that humans perceive and recognize that quality is slightly beyond their perception. So how can clueless automatons
We are.
summarize it?
Calvin, probably this hasn't been the most productive session, but for me, it's been the most enjoyable one. In terms of, it's just, it's like I'm thinking, oh God, you got me going crazy, Cal. I mean, we're going to be a professional organization next fall. Do we need to get a panel? Do we need to get a workshop? Do we need to get people sequestered in a room and try
We need to get a clue.
Yeah, get a clue. Oh, God. Kelvin, as I look at this, we have one session left, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, or we just keep on going. Whichever. And hey, if you found your way to watching this, we'd love to hear from you. I mean, reach out. You can find our contact information on YouTube. But if you don't want to hear from us anymore, then stop watching. But if you do, then say something.
Yeah,
How about that?
Yeah, we do, because ultimately, I think both of our intentions in doing this is to broaden and expand the conversation about quality. Well, again, there's just the recent issue of MI Technology Review. It is defining creativity in the age of AI. And that's really interesting, because I could scratch out creativity and just as easily put quality in there.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a whole other topic, in terms of how this is going to impact our lives.
Well, maybe that's a good place to
Yeah.
stop for this one, draw a line, and we'll pick it back up next time. So bye for now, Chuck.
Bye for now, Kelvin. I am still Chuck Jubin, and I'm assuming you're still Kelvin Thompson.
I mean, sure, maybe.
Maybe.
Possibly.
Reach out, folks. We'd love to hear from you.